Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is the end of 2023 and there is only one thing on everyone's minds: lists. Yes, as we hit the end of the year, it's put me in a reflective mood, and as always, I'm going to give you my top 10 games of 2023. As ever though, there's a little bit of housekeeping before we start. The rules for this list are relatively simple. 1. I must have newly played the game in 2023. 2. We have the no Ocarina of Time rule. Now typically this would always rule out all remasters, but since 2023 is a bit of a unique year, that rule has been relaxed somewhat. Now the no Ocarina of Time rule is very simply no Ocarina of Time. I'm not allowed to put it on the list. And finally, rule 3. Old games are allowed on the list as long as I newly played them within 2023. So without further ado, let's get to it, and start with number 10. Number 10. Baldur's Gate 3. This will be a conspicuous choice for many people. Baldur's Gate 3 has been at the top of almost everyone's lists this year, and for good reason. The time and effort Larian has put into this game is absolutely clear from the start. It is one of the freest games I have ever played, with so many choices and the world reacting to those choices in a way that's realistic. It is almost certainly the best realization of Dungeons & Dragons, the tabletop format, as a video game. And my own playthrough was filled with 1,000 different unique moments that I don't think anyone else will ever see. Praise needs to be heaped on the voice acting within the game, which is incredible. From the companions that you meet that stay with you for the entire game, to a single villager you might meet just because you happen to walk in a certain direction. It's obvious that Baldur's Gate 3 is a labor of love, yet it's strange then that this game sits at number 10. And the truth is, at least for me, it is a game of great ambition, much of which is fulfilled, but it is also a game with very significant flaws in my opinion. You'll notice that this is the only game where I'm using stock footage from trailers instead of my own playthrough, and that's because it runs so poorly on my computer that it's almost impossible for me to record and play the game at the same time. A memory leak forced me to restart every 2 hours, the game performance ground to a crawl in the third act, and textures didn't load in the final battle, which was rather odd. And ultimately that just does have an impact on your immersion, as much as you might not want to care about it. I might be able to forgive some bugs, but ultimately, there are more issues that I have with Baldur's Gate. The balance of the entire game is just completely off whack, with changes that Larian have made to 5e translating to, I think, a much worse overall gameplay experience for me. Shove is an instant kill, haste is an unbelievably broken action, encounters will roll up with 20 to 30 enemies where you spend most of your time watching the AI rather than playing. And this is paired with a system of moral choice that essentially means that I'm either Ming the Merciless or the goodiest two-shoes of all time. I'd class each and every one of these as a niggle. They aren't important by themselves, but combined, they led to an experience that wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. And so Baldur's Gate sits here as a huge achievement in gaming, but my number 10 for 2023. Number 9. Story of Seasons, A Wonderful Life. If anything, 2023 was the year of remaking stuff from the GameCube, and I absolutely loved Harvest Moon, A Wonderful Life. So it's unsurprising that I picked this game up, but what is surprising is how much I got into it. A Wonderful Life isn't the be-all and end-all farming game that, for example, Stardew Valley might be. But what I do think it has is focus. It has focus purely on farming and nothing else. There is no random dungeon to go to where you need to kill monsters to get stuff for the villagers. There's no mining that you need to spend all of your time on to get ore to put into machines. What this game is about, fundamentally, is farming and making money from doing that. And that is why it's so appealing to me and why I enjoyed it so much. I could get onto my farm, sit down and vibe with my crops, and I would never have to worry about anything else in the game. And what's so cool is how this reflects in the mechanics of the game itself. You can name certain crops that you breed together, which means that you can essentially personalize your farm the exact way that you want to. Not just with animals that have cute names of your friends, but also of crops that you've made that represent their personalities. I made a plant that looks like an American football, so I named it after my friend who's most into American football. I made an incredibly spicy fruit, so I named it after the spiciest person I know. But what I think really got to me was the passage of time. It is unique to see a farming game where time passes, where your character gets older, and you see your kids mature and age with you. And when I played this 20 years ago, the impact of that was lost on me, but now, as a man in his mid-30s, seeing relationships mature, the way that they have in my life is a lot more fulfilling now than it was as a teenager. And so I'm really happy that this game got remade, because I have such a different perspective on it now, and I've had such a great time playing it this year. Number 8. Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp. God damn, was this worth the wait. Delayed for a year by the invasion of Ukraine of all things, Advance Wars Reboot Camp is everything I wanted out of a remake of these games. Advance Wars represents the formative strategy game for me. It is the first turn-based strategy I ever picked up, and it is one that I played to absolute pieces on the GBA. The remake is great, it's colourful, it has amazing music, and it plays the exact way that I remembered it, except the AI can't cheat at Fog of War anymore, which is a big improvement. What was great fun for me was going back through a campaign that as a kid I found very, very difficult, and S-ranking every single mission because I knew exactly how to play. And yeah, that might come off as a little bit childish, but take that, 13-year-old natural 20, I'm smarter than you. The important part is that all these years later, the games hold up. They are near peerless strategy games, and it shows how well designed they are, because so many imitators have come and gone, and yet these are still better. And when you add on a few of the flourishes with the remake, like Clone Andy's absolutely sick new theme, you have a game that has me hotly anticipating anything new coming out of this franchise in the next few years. Number 7. Resident Evil 4. Yes, this is technically a remake as well, but the game is titled Resident Evil 4 and there's no mention of a remake there. The original Resident Evil 4 was my introduction to the entire franchise, and whilst I'm not a big fan of survival horror, when it was blended with the action arcadey style of that game, I found something that I could really love. So I was really happy to see 4 Remake living up to the standard of its ancestor. It's a buttery smooth game that's a delight to play from start to finish, that maintains a lot of the atmosphere of the original game. I love how they've reimagined the environments from the original, and how excellent the gunplay feels, with so many of the firearms feeling really weighty. You can almost feel the kick when a magnum blast hits an enemy right square in its eye. And yet for me, despite the power in the hands of the player, it was always able to maintain a little bit of an edge. I always felt a little worried about what was around the corner next, and often I'd be prone to panic in situations that I should have been calm about. So credit where it's due, it's really managed to evoke the feel of that original game. And then of course you add on the Separate Ways DLC with Ada, which provided another great jumping point back into the game. That was a great extended sequence, and I loved how differently it felt to play Ada. It was a more cerebral experience, especially near the end, where luring enemies into traps proved to be so useful. If there's any criticism to be leveled at this game, it's that the original is still so good that I question the need for a remake. And so Resident Evil 4 Remake ultimately falls short of one of the greatest games of all time, but that still means it's pretty damn good. Number 6. Metroid Prime Remastered. We come to the end of our list of remakes and remasters with the other greatest game of all time that released on the GameCube. To say that Metroid Prime is a pivotal game in my life is an understatement. This channel exists in the form that it does because Metroid Prime made me curious about 2D Metroidvania games, and playing it again today, it is easy to see why. I could go on about how easy it is to get lost in the world of Talon 4, how remembering puzzles that you did 20 years ago can feel like putting on a warm pair of socks in the winter. I can go on at length about how each area flows into one another, creating this idea of a living, breathing planet. One that is so wonderful to explore, but never ever too confusing. But what I think I really want to praise is the remaster itself. The addition of new play control makes this the definitive way of playing Metroid Prime. The use of motion control to direct exactly how Samus shoots makes for an experience that is just better in every way than the version that came out on the GameCube. But I think a huge amount of praise also needs to go in the looks of this game. The greatest thing I can say about the remaster is that it looks exactly like Metroid Prime. Not the Metroid Prime that you'll play on the GameCube now, but the Metroid Prime that has lived in your mind for 20 years. It is somehow the same Talon 4 that caused me to stop and look around in awe when I first saw Phendrana Drifts. It is somehow the same Talon 4 that made me feel a sense of dread when I first walked into Phazon Mines. And that is an achievement that I have never seen any other remaster get close to. I cannot recommend this enough, and the only reason I think it's not at number 1 is because this game did release 20 years ago. Number 5. Super Mario Wonder. I'm usually a little reticent to put games I've not completed on this list, but Super Mario Wonder has prompted me to defy that stance, not just because I believe the game will maintain the standard that it's cleaved to for its entire runtime so far, but also because I really believe now in Nintendo's ability to continue surprising me. Wonder's platforming is, fairly unsurprisingly for a mainline Mario game, second to almost none. The gameplay is smooth as butter, with characters feeling incredibly responsive, and the level design manages to vary from quite easy to incredibly challenging, which feels like a really good mix for the game. But the Wonder segments are really where this game stands out. I find myself looking forward to them in every single level to see what Nintendo will come up with next. And so far I haven't been disappointed. Each segment is unique, and each segment provides a new insight into the gameplay that's been introduced by the level. The only big criticism to level at the game is that they could do more with these Wonder segments. I could spend more time within them. And usually, when your criticism of a game is that you want to play more of it, it's done a pretty good job. We'll see how that opinion evolves over 2024 as Yorkshire T and I continue to play the game. But for now, I'm really happy to put Super Mario Wonder up on this list. Number 4. Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty. At this point, I imagine most people watching this channel have heard about the revival of Cyberpunk, a game that's come back from a disastrous launch to critical acclaim. But I'm one of the rare people that really enjoyed the initial release of Cyberpunk, largely because I didn't see 99% of the bugs that were reported, and most of the issues that plagued the game to begin with just didn't seem to affect my run. But even for a guy like me, who really did enjoy the base game, Phantom Liberty and Cyberpunk 2.0 in general are such a massive step up in every single facet that it is impossible not to put them somewhere on this list. Phantom Liberty in particular as an expansion is a tour de force, a really compelling and interesting narrative that is very thematically different from what you handle during the main body of Cyberpunk 2077. A hard-nosed spy thriller to Cyberpunk's bombastic action movie. But aside from all the cool mechanical changes to the game, I think what really puts it over the top is the performances that have been put in. Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand appears to be written out at the beginning of the expansion, but after a couple of hours he's back in with you, and I think this is the best that Keanu has done within that role. He feels really comfortable as Silverhand now, in a way that just doesn't come across in his initial performance. But I think honors really have to go to Idris Elba's performance. Elba's performance as Solomon Reed is Arguably to me, the best performance I've seen in gaming. There might be better voice actors, but as an all-around actor, Elba blows almost everyone I've seen out the water. Reed is a character who is reticent, he's quiet, he's a spy, he's hidden in among himself. And yet Elba is able to convey the way that Reed feels, not through his voice, but through his expressions. A few years ago, this kind of performance wouldn't have been possible with motion capture software where it was. But in Phantom Liberty, Elba uses the technology expertly to provide a performance the likes of which I've never quite seen before. And that's to say nothing of the new ending that was added as part of Phantom Liberty. It is one of the best endings I've ever seen to a game, playing to the themes of Cyberpunk in a way that I've never seen any game do before. It was deeply affecting, and I had to stand back and think just about that ending for 10 to 15 minutes afterwards because of how much it affected me. Phantom Liberty on its own is the near perfect expansion to a game, and if you were on the fence about Cyberpunk because of all the news from 2 years ago, I'd really recommend you give it a look now. Number 3. The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. People who know me would probably have expected this game to be number 1. Frankly, I expected this game to be number 1. And there is a lot to love about Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild was in my top 3 games of all time. It is a game that I can come back to and play anytime, and it feels amazing every single time I do. If you'd asked me what I wanted out of a sequel to Breath of the Wild, I would have told you I wanted a game with deeper dungeons, more storyline integration. So it's probably a good thing that I don't work at Nintendo, because they chose the exact opposite and it seems to have done pretty well for them. It's difficult to sufficiently convey the magnitude of Tears of the Kingdom's achievement. That Nintendo could have taken the world from Breath of the Wild and made it so familiar and so different at the same time is an achievement that I think that people will be coming back to for years. The physics system within the game is a complete marvel, and the things that can be done with Ultra Hand can only be really described as black magic. And this combines with an ending that's probably the best I've seen out of the entire franchise. I think the thing that stops Tears of the Kingdom reaching my all-time list, or even making the top of this one, is that the game's design can't always meet its ambition. Whilst the Sky Islands represent really cool puzzles that allow you to get from archipelago to archipelago, the underworld is incredibly sparse and also needlessly difficult to travel, with very little of interest beyond the occasional Colosseum or boss fight. And whilst the Ultra Hand mechanics are fun initially, if you're like me and not that into construction, then the game quickly devolves into conjuring a jet bike and flying around as quickly as you can. And finally, the weapon fusion system is interesting, but ultimately leads to a more broken version of combat, because instead of hitting an enemy and stealing their weapon, you now hit an enemy, steal their weapon, and then fuse that weapon to something else. A couple of seconds that shouldn't be relevant, but add up over thousands upon thousands of combats, until you realize that it's disrupted the flow of the game. But these complaints are small, born of hundreds of hours put into that world, and then many more afterwards thinking about it. Complaints that small aren't enough to take away from the magnitude of the achievement of this game, but they are enough to knock it away from the top spot this year. That being said, I'm really excited to see where Zelda goes next.
I'm trying to get ahead, get out the way, now move forward, stand back, now break away, I'm about to bring it, I ain't never backing down.
Number 2. Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter 6 is the best fighting game ever made. I don't know how controversial that statement is or will be, but it is how I feel right now. The story of Street Fighter 6 for me is my friend who had never played fighting games before claimed he never wanted to play fighting games and was never going to be any good at them, picking up Street Fighter 6 and having the best time of his life playing. It's the story of being able to sit down with this guy and play on a relatively even feel, to show him things he'd never understood before, and see him grow and improve in real time. It's the story of me as a somewhat competitive player, finally really getting into ranked, and seeing myself improve in ways that I never expected. It's the story of a huge number of my friends having a great time posting ridiculous creator characters at each other. Street Fighter VI is the most inclusive fighting game I've ever seen, and that to me is what makes it the best. Modern is not just a simplified control method, but it is one that allows you to execute with intent, and that alone will draw so many more people into the genre. While I heap praise here, I'm ignoring the buttery smooth netcode, the amazing single player, the great lobbies, and the incredible community that has popped up around this game. 6 is simply a masterclass, and were it not for some rather shady DLC practices, would be in the number 1 position this year. However, that was taken by one other game. Number 1. Octopath Traveler 2. It is, to me, probably the best turn-based RPG that has released in the past 20 years. It has the best combat system, with Break, where specific weaknesses in enemies must be exploited to make them vulnerable, and Boost, a system that allows you to take multiple actions in one turn, causing every action to require just a little bit of thought before you do it. It has possibly the best progression system, with simple, understandable choices leading to complex results. It certainly has the best encounter design, where even near-perfect mastery of the system can still result in the devs surprising you and finding a way to knock you out when you didn't think that was possible. The 8 stories provided this time contrast each other well, and what I think is admirable is that the developers clearly took on feedback from the original game, with the crossed path system allowing better interaction between the party, and the final chapter really allowing us to see how our entire party interacts with one another. And yet I think that's been brilliantly done without losing the core conceit of the game, which is that this is a story about 8 different people with 8 very different perspectives and places in the world. There was not a single point across my near 150-hour playthrough where I was not having a great time. And what I loved is that the final super boss in the game was a genuine challenge despite the fact that I had nearly mastered the entire system. No turn-based RPG has ever come near to that since Bravely Default, and even that game required me to put restrictions on myself so I couldn't break it. Even with every weird and devious thought in my mind, Octopath Traveler 2 met me blow for blow, enough that I had to slink away in defeat and level up a little bit to deal with that final boss. And I cannot describe how refreshing that is for me as a person. I've ignored things I could continue to heap praise on, like the music, the unbelievable sprite work, the incredible battle art, but I think it's easy to say that Octopath Traveler 2 gripped me in a way that I haven't felt in a very long time. And so I think it's well deserving of its title as my Game of the Year 2023. Thank you all very, very much for watching, everyone. As ever, if you enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow our other LP content because that's pretty cool. But beyond that, have a wonderful 2024, and I'll catch you all in the new year.